to Herdstone Painting. My name is Mark, and today we're going back to Warhammer the Old World, and we're painting a Chaos Marauder of the Cult of the Bloodied Hound. And my goodness, these models are awesome. I'd love to be painting all of the units, but I'll get into the difficulties of that at the moment. But this guy was a lot of fun to paint. And we're going to start off with the flesh, the lowest part on this model, and we'll dress him up from there. We've undercoated our Marauder in Mechanicus standard grey, and then we're going to go in and paint a Caucasian flesh tone here. But I'm going to do a bit of mixture on this unit when I get around to the other models. But we're going to start with Reikland Fleshshade. We're going to take a few coats of this. We've watered it down so it's nice and thin, but it is quite thin paint anyway, so it should apply really nicely. Once you've got a couple of coats, we can get in with Reikland Fleshshade and paint over all of that. Not using like a Bugman's Glow means it's not going to be as deep in the recesses, not going to be as dark, so we're starting from a lighter base. And then we will get in there again with the Reikland Fleshshade and just pick out most of the higher areas of the flesh. And for these models, especially this guy, there isn't a lot. There's the hands, there's the face. There may be other elements on some of the other models, but there's not a lot. So you can really speedily do this. Not like the old Marauders that were basically half naked, kind of Conan the Barbarian style. Once the Reikland Fleshshade's dried, we can go in with a bit of Kislev flesh. And all of these we want to water down to a decent amount, so they just cover, they're not covering the previous layers, they're kind of amplifying it, and we're just going to build up those layers on the higher areas. And then finally we can go with a tiny edge highlight of Flayed One flesh on the tips of the fingers, the knuckles, and then maybe the nose, and maybe parts of the lips. We're going to do something a bit different here. We're going to base coat a whole load of different elements and then paint them later. So we're going to base coat and then wash them all together. So we're going to start with the undersuit, which is really just his legs, his feet, and on his arms. And we're painting that with Corvus Black. Go for 2 thin coats if you can on this one. And then I'm going with a red theme because he is Khorne, or the Bloodied Hound. So we're going with Galvorback Red, which is a nice new paint I picked up. I thought it was quite brick red in comparison to like Khorne Red and Mephiston Red, which seem a little bit more saturated. So we're going with Galvorback Red here, and I was really impressed with how it looked. So 2 coats of this should be perfect. And then we'll go in and do all the wooden sections with Dryad Bark. And then our lovely Nuln Oil. We'll be able to go all over this, and this will be the weapon, the shields for Dryad Bark. And already we're base coating quite a lot of this model, and then there are a lot of wraps and there are a lot of different textures that build up on him, but I feel this is the best way to build him up as we get started. And then we'll kind of cover everything in Nuln Oil in this case, as there is a shared wash, and then we can get into the actual detailing of these pieces. So we're going to do the leather, the cloaks, and the wood, in using different methods here to save a bit of time in some places and just to make it look nice and clean in others. So with the blacker sections, we're going to just relayer with Corvus Black, leaving the Nuln Oil in the deepest recesses. Work your way around. There isn't a lot of it, and a lot of it you can just leave because it's not really visible. And then we'll get some Mechanicus standard grey and just pick out some of the edges on the boots and some of the elbow elements. But a lot of it's hidden from view, so you can get away with not doing too much here. The Nuln Oil and the Corvus Black would have done all of the work. And then just we'll kiss those edges with a little bit of Dawnstone, just on the edges of the feet. Moving on to the red now, we're going to repaint with Galvorback Red, leaving that Nuln Oil in the recesses, and we've watered this down a little bit more so that it leaves that wash underneath. It's kind of, layering over, but it's not completely covering, which is an important step here for cloaks. And you don't want to work your way around and pick the higher areas out. You also want to repaint over the vast majority of it. We'll now mix a bit of Galvorback Red with Wordbearer's Red, which feels like a really nice step up in a kind of ready brick texture. And we'll run that around the higher elements. Again, this is quite watered down, but we'll kind of pick out as much as we possibly can. I think for the rest of the unit, I'm going to do a mixture of reds. I might do some with Khorne red, and I'll do some with Barakvar burgundy, just to make it different, you know, have different red textures, but I thought it was a cool colour to go for now. And then we'll get Word Bearer's red and just pick out those edges all around the cloak sides, and then some of the flaps we can just paint the lines to make it give the illusion of the light touching it. And then for the wood, instead of layering around, you know, wood always looks great when it's dry brushed, so we're just going to dry brush some Gorethorpe brown here. I'm not using a specific dry brush, I don't have any, I'm just using a beaten up old brush, it seems to do the trick. And then we'll dry brush all of it with Baneblade brown, but a little bit lighter, so we don't want to have as much pigment on that brush. Just pick out the highest elements of the shield and the weapon with your Baneblade brown. Now we're base coating and washing again a whole load of elements, but we're using Agrax Earthshade this time rather than Nuln Oil. So we're going to be a little base coating, and then we're going to do the washing. So we'll start with Reikland Fleshshade, which is going to be this the hide on his back. It's like another cloak, but it's actually flesh, or it's been flayed flesh, and it's, you know, still got the fur of whatever animal had been flayed on there as well. So we'll be base coating that with Reikland Fleshshade, and then we'll get the Wraith Bone and go in and do all of the bandages and the strapping on the boots and arms as well. Two similar colours there, but now we're going to go with Avalanche Sunset. We're going to make him look like a Viking. He's going to have nice blonde hair in this case. So we've gone Avalanche Sunset on his beard and his moustache. Don't forget the moustache. We're going with a bit of Wraith Bone as well. At this point, I realised I hadn't done his teeth, so I've got a little tiny brush here. And I'm just getting some tiny little dots on the teeth. I'm not picking out every single one, but just making sure that they're a different colour to the skin. And we get the old workhorse out, Steel Legion Drab, one of the best colours, to paint all the horns and any bones that are on there, as well as the ropes and the straps. And then similar to the Nuln Oil, we can just go around. We'll probably want a smaller brush to do this. I use an old layer brush that's kind of seen better days to do this kind of thing. I find using the nice brushes, it's a terrible idea with washes because it will just dry in the ferrule of the brush. So just using an old beaten up brush and putting Agrax Earthshade all over it. So now we'll go in and now do the actual painting on these sections. And then now that the Agrax is dried, give it plenty of time to dry. It actually makes all these colours look very similar in the end. But this hide was really fun. I think that the best way to do them, and there's a lot of them on these models, is to get the Reikland Fleshshade, make sure it's quite watered down, and paint the lines across it, and then start filling in some of those areas. So you can see I've started that here, and then I've kind of flooded those areas in with a bit of Reikland Fleshshade. So here's how it looked in the end, and I've grabbed flayed one flesh and just painted the edges, and then done a few smaller lines to make it look like the flesh has been stretched and dried and just had seen better days. I mean, it was once alive. I'll let you guys decide what animal it was at the end of this video. We'll go in with Wraith Bone now and relayer over all of the bandages and the bracings on the arms. I should say arms, sorry, on the forearms and on the shins. Make sure to water this down fairly well so it doesn't completely douse the area. You also want to pick out the bandages in question. And then I'll run in White Scar and just paint the highest parts of these. Sometimes there's a little bit of guesswork with it because you can't go left, right, diagonal all the time. And this is a rank and file model, so just pick out what you can see. And then the beard, ignore the middle section. That's actually a bone. I thought it was a beard. It's not. I'll repaint that as a bone in a minute. But pick out the individual hairs with the Avalanche Sunset. But most importantly, that moustache and the beard elements to the left and right of the middle bone. They're mixed together, 50-50 Avalanche Sunset and White Scar, just to make a kind of a hay almost type colour, and just pick out the highest elements, and that will pretty much do us. Of course, there's multiple different colours of hair and skin, so I'll probably mix and match that as I go through the unit. So moving on to the bones, I wanted to keep this separate, so going over the Steel Legion Drab, I've actually gone back over that bone in the middle of the beard. We're going to go down over with Baneblade Brown, and we're going to heavily relayer this over all the elements, leaving only the Agrax Earthshade and Steel Legion Drab in the deepest recesses. And we've watered this down quite nicely so that it kind of leaves them textures underneath the Baneblade Brown. Then we can go in with Karak Stone, the next step up, and Edge Highlight. Again, watering it down so we get all the previous layers coming through. But you want to paint back over pretty much most of what you've already done. And then we'll use Flayed One Flesh, which I've always found it works better than like a Shabty Bone. In fact, to the point where I've not bought a Shabty Bone for a long time. I just use the Flayed One Flesh. It seems to work really nicely with those previous 3 colours. So I'll just pick everything out with the Flayed One Flesh here. And then finally, just a tip of White Scar on the edges of the bones, and really just pick out those extreme pieces. You don't have to relay over everything, but just the edge of the horns, and then the very top of the horns where they meet the helmet, and that will kind of pick it all out for you really nicely. There is a severed head hidden in the model, awkwardly. So I'd painted this in the same way as the hide on the cloak, and then what I'm going to go back in is just make it look a bit grim, and mixed some Lamium Medium and Berserker Bloodshade together. I'm just going to douse it all over, and then whilst that's still drying, I will grab some Euphonian Camo Shade to make it look like it's starting to decay a little bit, or especially around the neck section where it's been severed. And I'll just paint that in there and let it kind of all sort of merge together. Pretty grim. And what I did when that was all dry, I actually got some White Scar and just picked out the eyes, the dead eyes of this poor unfortunate soul, who they clearly killed in a pub somewhere in Norska. Moving on to the metals now. So, not using a wet palette, we're just putting them straight onto a standard plastic palette here, or if you've got a tile, whatever works best for you. And they will dry a little bit faster, but if you keep adding water as you work along, it should keep it nice and fresh. We're painting all of the metal in Iron Warriors here, and then we're washing it with Nuln Oil. The best wash. We really are dousing this to add to the effect. We'll then go in and use Iron Hand still to pick out all the edges, and then on the cutting edges, I'm actually painting the vast majority of it. So you'll see me kind of brush in some elements here on here, leaving a few parts of the Iron Warriors showing through, but pretty much picking out all of that cutting edge, making it look sharp and nasty. These guys aren't Nurgle. Followers of Nurgle at the end of the day, they will look after their weapons, I reckon. And then Stormhurst Silver will just pick out the edges of these pieces. And then there's a small strap on the top of the helmet, kind of a little nod to that Warriors of Chaos kind of sort of edging that they have on all their armours. And we'll get some Ruin Lord brass and just pick out this arrow on this helmet. And Match Made in Heaven, I'd use it all the time, but a little bit of Seraphim Sepia on this Ruin Lord brass just takes it more towards gold, further away from brass, but damn, it looks really nice. And don't worry too much if it gets a little bit on the silver, it'll look like kind of a bit of battle damage and wear and tear. And then all you need to do now is just edge highlight that Ruin Lord brass with some Stormhost silver. So there's still a large part of the model left to paint. There was a lot of fur on this particular guy. There's an entire cloak on his back, which was obviously part of something living that has now been turned into a cloak. And there's also a lot of fur on the shield. So I thought, let's try some different approaches to this. So I thought I'd go for Death Corpse Drab on the cloak. Maybe some kind of chimera or something that this guy's managed to kill, maybe, or just found dead. And then we've used Mechanicus standard grey, a little bit more of a standard colour for fur on the shield, just to differentiate it and give it a little bit of a different colour. And also there's a little bit of green in that Death Corpse drab to contrast with the red, I feel, in a nice way. But we'll wash both of these with, again, Nuln Oil. Done this afterwards because there was a lot of dry brushing needed to be done around the shield, and also we wanted to do the cloak, or the flesh of the cloak first before we touch this. But this will bring them back together, so they're not going to be too distant, and we're actually going to paint them and highlight them in the same way. Now with furs, I tend to find if you dry brush it straight away, it just looks very chalky. It is the much faster way of doing it. What I'll tend to do is use Dawnstone to paint over the individual fur elements, and I'm doing that on both colours, so the Mechanicus standard grey section and the Death Corpse drab section, kind of now marrying them together and making the fur look the same. And then what I'll do once that's done is I'll then dry brush over it, and that will give it that furry feel. You know, 'cause I feel if you just instantly start dry brushing it with a lighter colour, I tend to find it just looks murky. And this will just pick out the higher areas. So it's a light dry brush. So taking the time to get in there and brush it. We'll paint it first and then dry brush it. Just kind of keeps it nice and clean. There is a few straps on the back of the model above that. The horn, which has also been painted like the bones. So just make sure to pick those out with a bit of Baneblade Brown and Karak Stone. And here is the final Chaos Marauder. I absolutely love these models. I would love to paint the whole regiment, and I have intentions to try to, but time is getting away from me at the moment with a lot of stuff. So I think at the moment we're kind of painting individuals for the time being. But my goodness, this guy's great. We're also painting a Marauder Horseman as well, which will hopefully get finished up soon. But I hope you enjoyed the run through, and like and subscribe. And if you didn't, thanks for stopping by. See you later.